3 days before my wedding, when I should have been floating on air, I found myself drowning in betrayal. My name is Sophia. I'm 28 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed I was about to marry the love of my life. I had always imagined that the hardest part of a wedding would be planning the flowers, surviving the endless family opinions, or maybe handling cold feet. But nothing prepared me for the moment his parents looked me in the eye and told me to sign a contract or walk away. It wasn't just a contract, it was an ultimatum. A prenuptial agreement slid across the coffee table, bound in thick blue paper, its words heavy with condescension. I didn't need to read to already feel. Sign it or the wedding is off. Those were the exact words. And as they looked at me, smug, certain, powerful, I realized they thought they knew who I was. To them, I was a poor teacher's daughter, a woman lucky to have caught the attention of their son, someone who should be grateful to even breathe the same air as the Blackwood family. But what they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that behind my modest apartment, my practical car, and my simple clothes lay the truth I had kept hidden for years. $9 million. A tech company I built from the ground up. An inheritance left to me by a grandfather who had believed in me more fiercely than anyone ever had. And yet none of that was what cut the deepest. What gutted me was the possibility, the horrifying, suffocating possibility, that Ethan, the man I loved, had known about this ambush all along. I remember staring down at the papers, my hands trembling as their words echoed in my skull. Every page was designed to strip me down, erase me, make me nothing more than an accessory to their empire. If Ethan and I ever divorced, I would walk away with nothing. Even worse, hidden in the legal jargon, they had carved out a way to take my company, my software, my very future. It wasn't just insulting, it was war disguised as formality. I wanted to scream, to tear that contract to shreds right in front of them. Instead, I smiled tight, polite, the way a cornered animal bares its teeth. I told them I'd need my lawyer to look it over. But they didn't like that answer. No, they wanted it now. Signed, sealed, erased, my worth gone in black ink before the flowers had even been set in place for my wedding. When I walked out of their mansion, their voices followed me like poisoned arrows. She'll sign. Where else would she go? Who else would want her? I barely made it to my car before the tears blurred my vision, before my body shook with a grief that felt like betrayal from every direction. And yet the tears were not just sadness. They were rage. Rage that I had ignored all the signs, the subtle digs about my scholarship, the patronizing smiles about my parents being just teachers, the backhanded compliments about my little company. For months I had swallowed them down, believing love would be enough. Believing Ethan would stand between me and their cruelty. But when I called him, his silence said everything. Yes, he knew. Not the timing perhaps, not the ambush, but the prenup itself. He had known it was coming, had avoided telling me, and left me to face the firing squad alone. He tried to soften it, told me it was just tradition, just a piece of paper, something every family does. But he hadn't even read the fine print himself. I had. And what I saw was not protection, it was ownership. I told him then, through a voice tight with betrayal, that he had a choice to make: stand with me or stand with them. He tried to straddle the middle, but we both knew there was no middle ground left. I hung up the phone with a shaking hand, my heart breaking, but my resolve hardening. That night, I sat alone in my apartment with the prenup on the table in front of me, the same table where Ethan and I had once cooked together, laughed together, planned a future together. But now, instead of love and laughter, there was silence and a decision. For years, I had hidden the truth of who I was. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted to be loved for myself, not for a number on a bank statement. But the Blackwoods had forced my hand. They had mistaken silence for weakness, modesty for poverty, humility for nothingness. And I realized then, the time for hiding was over. I opened my laptop and pulled up my financial portfolio. The numbers stared back at me like a lifeline. $7.5 million in investments. Another $1.5 million from my company. A total of 9 million reasons to never bow to the Blackwoods. I was not a girl begging for a place at their table. I was a woman with her own empire. That night, I sent a message to my grandfather's old lawyer, a man who had fought battles tougher than this. We agreed to meet at dawn. And as I crawled into bed still trembling, I knew one thing with crystal clarity: they thought they had cornered me. But in 3 days at that altar, it wouldn't be me who was tested. It would be them. The following morning, the city still half asleep outside my window, I sat in my office waiting for Harold, my lawyer. I had barely slept, my mind looping endlessly through betrayal, anger, and a strange, burning clarity. By the time he walked in, perfectly pressed suit and leather briefcase in hand, I already knew what I wanted. When I handed him the document, he didn't need long to see what I had seen. His frown deepened line by line until he finally set the papers down and declared, "This isn't a prenup, it's a weapon." I nodded. That's exactly what it felt like. A weapon meant to strip me of dignity, security, and worth. But Harold didn't just frown. He smiled. A slow, dangerous smile that belonged to a man who had spent decades dismantling arrogant opponents in courtrooms. "Sophia," he said, "you have far more leverage than they realize. And if you want to fight this, I will not only fight, I'll win." Those words lit a fire in me. For the first time since the ambush, I felt not like prey, but like a predator with teeth of her own. Together we worked for hours crafting a counterproposal that was the opposite of their one-sided terms. This agreement would protect Ethan's assets and mine. It would protect both legacies, both families. And most importantly, it would protect my intellectual property, my company, my creation, the thing I had poured my life into. When we finished, I held that folder like it was a sword. No longer was I at their mercy. But before the Blackwoods, I had to face Ethan. That was the part I dreaded the most. Not the polished, cold faces of his parents, but the warm brown eyes I had once trusted without question. Because before I could fight for us, I had to know if there even was an us left to fight for. I chose Carlucci's, the Italian place where he had first told me he loved me. I arrived early, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would bruise my ribs. When Ethan walked in, he looked exhausted. His tie was crooked, his eyes shadowed as if the weight of his parents had finally settled on him in ways he could no longer carry so effortlessly. "Sophia," he said, almost breaking when he saw me. "I'm sorry. I didn't know they'd do it like that. But apologies mean little when you've already let someone else fire the bullets." I folded my arms, fighting the tremor in my voice. "You knew about the prenup, you knew this was coming, and you let them ambush me 3 days before our wedding. Tell me, Ethan, did you think I would just sign? Did you think I was that desperate to marry you?" His face crumpled. "No, God, no, I didn't know how to bring it up. I kept putting it off. I thought we'd have time." Time. That word cut through me like glass. Because time was the one thing they hadn't given me. They had demanded obedience by morning, demanded I choose humiliation or heartbreak before I'd even had the chance to breathe. I slid the new folder across the table. "I have something to show you." He frowned, opened it, and the color drained from his face as he realized what it was. Not the Blackwood document, but ours, mine. "This is fair," he whispered, scanning the clauses with a lawyer's eyes. "This is actually fair." "It's what a prenup should be," I said. "A shield, not a sword. If your family truly cared about protection, they would have drafted something like this. But they didn't. They wanted me erased." Then slowly I placed another folder beside it. My portfolio, my inheritance, my company valuation, my truth. His hands shook as he flipped through it. 9 million. His voice cracked. "You've been sitting on this the whole time." "Yes." My throat tightened. Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I had. Because I didn't want wealth to poison everything. And because deep down I wanted to see how your family would treat me if they thought I had nothing. His eyes lifted to mine. Hurt flickered there, but also shame. So it was a test. "Not of you," I said quickly. "Never of you, but yes, and your parents failed spectacularly." He sat back, rubbing his hands over his face, whispering, "My God." Silence stretched between us, filled with the ghosts of everything we hadn't said, hadn't trusted, hadn't revealed. Finally, he dropped his hands and met my gaze. "Then let's do this together. Present this to them. No more secrets. No more letting them control us." I wanted to believe him. And in that moment, seeing the conviction in his eyes, I did. For the first time since the ambush, I felt like maybe we were still a team. That night, we walked into the Lakeview restaurant side by side. It was neutral ground, carefully chosen, a place where his parents' sharp edges couldn't cut as easily. The private dining room gleamed with crystal and mahogany, the lake glittering beyond the windows, but all I could feel was the storm gathering as the door opened. Victoria swept in first, Richard right behind her, both of them dressed as though for battle, their wealth dripping from every thread. She smiled that cold, polished smile and said, "Well, dear, I trust you've come to your senses." But this time I was not trembling. This time I wasn't silent. I laid the folder on the table, slid it across the polished wood, and said in a voice steady as steel, "No, I've come with my own terms." Victoria didn't sit at first. She drifted around the chair as if to claim the room, eyes sliding over the folder like it offended the silverware. Richard took the seat opposite Ethan and folded his hands, the precise posture of a man who believes the outcome is already decided. I watched them both and felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you've already bled out every fear and there's nothing left but truth. "We reviewed your document," I said, my voice even. "It was unacceptable. This is our agreement. It protects both families and leaves no room for bullying." Bullying. Victoria's laugh was soft and elegant, meant to cut without leaving a mark. "Darling, that word doesn't belong at this table. We're merely safeguarding the legacy Ethan was born into." Born into, Ethan repeated quietly. And for once I heard steel in him. Not enslaved to. He tapped the folder. "We will not proceed with a one-sided contract." Richard finally opened the file. I watched his eyes move, the slight tightening around them, as he hit each clause that returned balance to ground they'd already salted. Intellectual property protection. A fair division framework that accounted for growth during marriage. The concept that marital partnership had value beyond bloodlines and capital. "These terms are unorthodox," he said after a moment, and rushed. Rushed, I leaned in. "You delivered an ultimatum with a ticking clock 3 days before my wedding dress even left the garment bag. This is restraint." Victoria's gaze fixed on me with a new intensity, assessing, recalculating. "And tell me," she said sweetly, "what exactly are you protecting so ferociously?" "A hobby business, savings from a teacher's household." I had brought the second folder for this moment. I slid it onto the linen, the edge whispering against the cloth like a fuse being lit. "What I'm protecting," I said, opening it so the first page faced them, "is $9 million in investments and a company that supports classrooms in a dozen districts." The room inhaled. Even the chandelier seemed to blink. Richard's hand stopped on the paper. His eyes flicked up to me as if I'd changed languages. Victoria's smile stuttered, then froze in place like porcelain gone cold. "I prefer to live simply," I continued, the tremor gone from my voice. "My parents taught me that wealth is a tool, not a costume. Your document would have given you a claim on the tools I've built and the work I love. You didn't write it to protect a marriage. You wrote it to win a war no one declared." Ethan's fingers brushed mine beneath the table. It wasn't a plea, it was alignment. Richard cleared his throat and flipped pages, hunting for the trap that wasn't there. "These statements, are they current?" "As of last month," I said. "Audited, you can verify. But whether it's $9 million or $9, the principle doesn't change." A flush crept up Victoria's neck, and for a second I thought it was anger. It wasn't. It was something more complicated, an old habit of superiority cracking under the weight of evidence. "You concealed this," she whispered, and for the first time there was something raw under the polish. "All this time." "Because I wanted to be seen," I said, "not priced." Ethan straightened, his jaw set. "And because I failed to make space for honesty. That ends now." He turned to his father. "We'll sign the agreement on the table. If your lawyers want to review it, they have until tomorrow at 3. Any changes must preserve balance. Non-negotiable." Richard held my gaze for a long beat, as if testing whether I would flinch. I didn't. He looked back down at the clauses, and I could almost hear the quiet machinery of his mind recalibrating from conquest to containment. "We'll review and revert," he said finally. "By 3. Victoria reached for her water with the slow care of someone relearning a basic motion. She didn't drink. "I misjudged you," she said, barely above a murmur. "I saw plain fabric and thought it meant a plain weave." Her eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to me. "It seems I mistook humility for emptiness." "I don't want a victory," I said. "I want a family I can step into without shrinking my spine." Something softened in her face, only slightly, like a door built too tight for its frame testing a new hinge. She said nothing more. But when the waiter came to ask about dinner, she declined with a small shake of the head, the battle cooling around us. We rose. Richard offered his hand and I took it. His grip was firm, the unspoken language of equals who don't have to like each other to understand the rules. Victoria inclined her head, no warmth, not yet, but no scorn either. Progress sometimes looks like the absence of a wince. In the hallway, away from the chandelier light, Ethan exhaled so hard his shoulders sagged. "I should have done this sooner," he said. "I should have stood in front of you, not behind." I touched his sleeve. "Then stand here now, with me, and don't move." Outside, the lake had turned the color of tarnished silver, the wind lifting strands of my hair like threads pulled free. We walked without talking past couples laughing over oysters, past the valet stand, and the gold trim and the practiced smiles. The night smelled like rain and change. On the sidewalk, he stopped. "I need to tell you something." His eyes were steady, and for once there was no practiced diplomacy in them. "When my brother married, my parents insisted on their document. His wife signed it because her father said to. They call it tradition, but it's a test. It's how they measure control." "They measured the wrong thing tonight," I said. He nodded. "It won't be the last measurement." A faint rueful smile. "But I'm done letting them use rulers on us." He took my hands. "If they try to push, we push back," I finished, together. We stood there in the cooling air, two people who had spent a year pretending the ground was smooth, finally feeling the bedrock. It wasn't romantic, not the way proposals wrapped in sunsets are. It was better. It was a choice with both eyes open. Later in my apartment, I set both folders on the counter and stared at them. Paper had almost broken me. Paper had also saved me. I thought of my grandfather, of calloused hands and compound interest, and the way he'd say, "Little one, don't confuse quiet with small." I hadn't. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. "Jenna." Well, I sent a photo of the lake and wrote, "We didn't bend." Her reply came back with a string of fireworks and a single sentence that made me laugh out loud. "Make them bring your chair to the table. Don't ask for a seat." I slept that night without dreams. No chase, no courtroom, no altar crumbling to dust. Just a long corridor in my mind with every door standing open. 2 days later, I stood in the bridal suite of the Drake Hotel, my wedding dress hanging like a vision against the wall. The sleek lines of silk and lace caught the morning light glowing, as if it were whispering, "You've survived the storm. Now step into the day you've earned." Jenna was fussing with my veil, her fingers trembling more than mine. "You look different," she said softly. "Not just beautiful though you are, but stronger. Like you're walking into this marriage on your terms." She was right. Something inside me had shifted. For years I had hidden pieces of myself, afraid to be seen too clearly. But now, after all the fire, I felt stripped down to the steel that had always been there, waiting to be revealed. My mother smiled from across the room, smoothing the train with a tenderness that broke me. "Confidence," she murmured. "That's what it is." My daughter finally stopped dimming her own light. A knock came at the door. Unexpected. Tentative. When it opened, I froze. Victoria stepped in. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of severe lines and diamond edges. Instead, she wore pale blue, softer, almost maternal. For the first time since I had met her, she looked human. "May I?" she asked, her voice low. My mother and Jenna exchanged glances, then slipped out, leaving us alone. Victoria approached slowly, her eyes lingering on the dress, the veil then finally settling on my face. "You make a beautiful bride," she said. There was no edge in it, no poison, just truth. I didn't know what to say, so I whispered, "Thank you." She reached out, hesitated, then touched the lace of my veil. Her hands shook slightly. "I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the half measure I offered at the restaurant. I misjudged you, Sophia. I judged your clothes, your car, your parents' profession, and I never looked deeper. I let arrogance blind me to the woman my son loves." Her words landed heavier than any insult she had ever thrown at me, because they were sincere. And sincerity from Victoria Blackwood felt rarer than gold. It wasn't easy, I admitted, my throat tight. To be treated like I was reaching above my station when I knew all along I wasn't. She nodded, shame flickering across her features. The Blackwoods don't apologize often. It's a family flaw. But I can tell you this, I was wrong. I see that now. From her clutch, she pulled a small velvet box and opened it. Inside lay sapphire and diamond earrings, their age etched into the delicate setting. These belonged to Ethan's great-grandmother. She was a factory worker's daughter who married into this family against every protest. They said she'd never fit. But when the Depression nearly ruined us, it was her ingenuity that saved the family business. She was the strongest woman I've ever read about in our history. She held the earrings out to me, something old, something blue, and maybe something new between us. Tears blurred my vision. I removed my pearls and let her fasten the sapphires into my ears. Her hands were steady now. "Thank you," I whispered. Her eyes softened, the corners of her mouth bending in something almost like a smile. "Ethan loves you. That should have been enough for me from the beginning. I hope you can forgive my failure to see that." I swallowed hard, emotion choking me. We've both learned something about assumptions. Moving forward is what matters. When she left, I stood before the mirror, my reflection gazing back at me with sapphire light in her ears and a steadiness in her spine. I wasn't marrying into a family as a beggar at the gates. I was stepping into it as myself, whole, undeniable, unafraid. Moments later, my father came to walk me down the aisle. His eyes shone, his voice rough. "My brilliant girl," he said, kissing my forehead. "Ready?" "More than ready," I whispered. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed of, and nothing like I had feared. Ethan's eyes filled when he saw me, and in that look was everything I needed: love, respect, resolve. Our vows were simple, but the weight behind them made even Victoria dab at her eyes. At the reception, I noticed it, the shift. Richard introduced me proudly to his associates as an entrepreneur, not an ornament. Victoria placed me beside her closest friend, a judge, as though my voice mattered. People no longer spoke down to me, they leaned in. Respect had replaced condescension. And it wasn't because of the money, though, that had forced their eyes open. It was because I refused to bend. As Ethan and I shared our first dance, he leaned close and murmured, "Amazing what 9 million can do for one standing." I laughed softly. "It's not about the money, it's about standing your ground." He smiled, pulling me closer. "Then we'll stand together, always." Weeks later, as we settled into our new home, one we had chosen ourselves, funded, equally built brick by brick as a team, I realized the prenup, now locked away in a safe deposit box, wasn't just paper. It was proof of something far more important. That love without equality is fragile. That respect without truth is hollow. And that the strongest marriages are built on open eyes, not blind hope. Looking back now, I don't regret the ultimatum. It forced me to stop hiding. It forced Ethan to choose. And it forced his family to face a truth they'd long ignored. Strength doesn't always come dressed in diamonds. Sometimes it drives an old Audi, wears modest clothes, and carries 9 million reasons to never be underestimated. So here's what I'll leave you with: never dim your light to make someone else comfortable. Never let silence write your story, and never ever let someone else decide your worth. If my story touched you, if you've ever stood your ground when the world told you to kneel, I'd love to hear your journey. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like mine. And don't forget to leave a comment. I read them all. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be less than who you are.